Dr. Gary Fraser has spent 39 years studying one question. Why do the people in this small California city live so much longer than everyone else? He has published over 275 peer-reviewed papers trying to answer it. In 1992, his research was the first to show that eating nuts protects against heart disease. Then he built the largest ongoing study of vegetarians in the world. 96,469 Seventh-day Adventists recruited between 2002 and 2007, tracked for years as they went about their ordinary lives in Loma Linda. His team recorded what they ate, tracked who died and from what, and followed the numbers wherever they led. Fraser is a tall, quiet, methodical man who has been a Seventh-day Adventist his entire life. He does not eat meat. He eats nuts every day. He drinks 5 or more glasses of water. He eats his lightest meal in the evening and his largest meal at midday. He has done this for decades in the same city where his research subjects live, practicing the same habits he studies. His results change what we know about protein, aging, and the biology of death. Adventist vegetarian men live 9.5 years longer than average Californians. Vegetarian women live 6.1 years longer. Those numbers do not come from one study. They come from 2 generations of data. The Adventist Health Study 1, tracking 34,000 people across 12 years, and the Adventist Health Study 2, the largest of its kind published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2013. And the finding is not a rounding error. It is 9.5 years, not 9, not about 10, 9.5. Today, Fraser's research and the 3 biological mechanisms it uncovered will explain exactly why. Write this down. Here is the argument you will hear when you mention Loma Linda to anyone who has read about it. Those people live long because they do not smoke, do not drink, go to church, and have a strong community. It has nothing to do with meat. It sounds reasonable. It is wrong, and the data makes it possible to show exactly why. The AHS2 study adjusted for smoking status, alcohol consumption, physical activity level, body mass index, and socioeconomic factors. The researchers controlled for all of it. The dietary differences in mortality between vegetarians and non-vegetarians persisted after every adjustment. Lifestyle factors explain some of the Adventist longevity advantage, but they do not explain all of it, and they do not explain the gap between vegetarian Adventists and non-vegetarian Adventists. That last part is the critical piece. Within the Adventist community, vegetarians outlive non-vegetarians. Same religion, same no-smoking culture, same church community, same social support. The single variable that explains the extra years is diet. All Adventists, including those who eat meat, already live longer than average Americans. Adventist men in general live 7.3 years longer. Adventist women live 4.4 years longer. The religion, the lifestyle, the community, those account for those years. But the vegetarian Adventists add another 2+ years on top of that. The extra 9.5 for men, the extra 6.1 for women. The diet-specific portion of that gap sits solidly on top of everything the lifestyle already provides. The reason is biological. Fraser's research pointed toward it. 3 separate research groups then found the mechanisms, and the mechanisms changed the entire conversation about what meat actually does inside the human body. The first mechanism is something most people have never heard of. It is called TMAO. When you eat red meat, you consume a compound called L-carnitine. L-carnitine is found naturally in beef, lamb, and pork. It is part of the muscle tissue. Your gut bacteria, specifically the strains that proliferate in people who eat meat regularly, convert L-carnitine into a molecule called trimethylamine, or TMA. Your liver then oxidizes TMA into trimethylamine N-oxide, TMAO. Stanley Hazen and his team at the Cleveland Clinic published the TMAO research in Nature Medicine in 2013. What they found was not subtle. TMAO promotes atherosclerosis through multiple simultaneous pathways. It activates inflammasome signaling in arterial walls. It promotes the formation of foam cells, the arterial plaques that build up and eventually rupture. It impairs reverse cholesterol transport, the process by which the body removes excess cholesterol from the arteries, and it enhances platelet hyperreactivity, which increases the tendency for blood to clot. TMAO does not do one bad thing to the cardiovascular system. It does four. The critical finding was about who produces it and who does not. Omnivorous humans, people who eat meat regularly, produce significantly more TMAO than vegans or vegetarians after ingesting the same amount of L-carnitine. Not because of genetics, because of their gut bacteria. Meat eaters develop gut bacteria that specialize in converting L-carnitine to TMA. Vegans and vegetarians lack these bacteria because without the consistent L-carnitine input, those bacterial populations never developed. In a clinical study of 2,195 patients undergoing cardiac evaluation, plasma L-carnitine levels predicted increased risk of cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, and death, but only in patients who simultaneously had high TMAO levels. L-carnitine alone was not the risk. L-carnitine plus meat eater, gut bacteria equals TMAO equals risk. Remove the meat, the bacteria change, the TMAO drops, the cardiovascular pathway closes. The Loma Linda vegetarians produce almost none of it. Take a moment. Think about what you ate for breakfast this morning. Did it include red meat, beef, pork, lamb, sausage, bacon? If yes, that meal was producing L-carnitine that your gut bacteria began converting within hours. This is not a reason for alarm. It is a reason to understand the mechanism before we talk about what to change. The second mechanism is IGF-1, and this is where the research gets more uncomfortable because IGF-1 is not just a cardiovascular story, it is a cancer story. IGF-1 stands for insulin-like growth factor 1. It is a growth hormone. Its job is to tell cells to grow and divide. In childhood and adolescence, high IGF-1 is appropriate. The body needs to build itself. In a 60-year-old, high IGF-1 acts on cells that are already fully grown. It tells them to keep dividing anyway. High IGF-1 is, in plain terms, fertilizer for abnormal cell growth. Valter Longo and his team at the University of Southern California published the definitive study in cell metabolism in 2014. They studied 6,381 American adults aged 50 and older from the NCHAIN's Thirst survey, a nationally representative sample. People aged 50 to 65 with high animal protein intake showed a 75% increase in overall mortality and a fourfold increase in cancer death risk during the 18-year follow-up period. Not a modest association, a 75% increase in dying from any cause, a fourfold increase in dying specifically from cancer. The critical finding, the one that exonerates plant protein entirely, is that these associations were abolished or substantially reduced when the protein source was plant-based. High animal protein drove the IGF-1 elevation and the mortality risk. High plant protein did not. The body processes the two differently. Vegan men have 9% lower serum IGF-1 compared to meat eaters. Vegan women have 13% lower IGF-1. In the AHS2 data, a vegan dietary pattern was associated with a 34% reduction in risk of female-specific cancers among participants. That is not a rounding error either. One important nuance that Fraser and Longo both note for people over 65, the picture changes. Once the body crosses a certain age threshold, adequate protein becomes protective against muscle loss and frailty, and the cancer-driving effect of moderate to high protein weakens. The Loma Linda protocol for someone in their late 60s or 70s is not about eliminating protein. It is about ensuring the protein comes from plants, beans, lentils, tofu, tempeh, nuts in sufficient quantities. The research target is at least 0.8 GRD of protein per kilogram of body weight per day from plant sources. Fraser's own daily habits reflect this. He is meticulous about plant protein, beans at midday, walnuts every day, soy milk. He does not guess about adequacy. He spent 4 decades studying it. The third mechanism is the one Fraser himself describes as the most counterintuitive finding of his career. Not because it overturns the dietary data, but because it reveals the specific molecular pathway through which animal protein accelerates aging at the cellular level. The mechanism is called mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. It is a master regulatory protein that controls whether cells go into growth mode or maintenance mode. When mTOR is active, cells grow and divide. When mTOR is suppressed, cells shift into repair and recycling mode, a process called autophagy, where the body breaks down damaged components and rebuilds them. Autophagy is, in simplified terms, the cellular housekeeping that prevents the accumulation of damage that aging represents. Animal protein, specifically the branched-chain amino acids leucine, isoleucine, and valine found in high concentrations in meat, activates mTOR strongly. Plant protein activates it less, much less. Fraser and Longo both point to this as the molecular explanation for the cancer and mortality data. High animal protein intake keeps mTOR in growth mode. The cells keep dividing. The cellular repair systems stay quiet. The damage accumulates. David Sabatini's work on mTOR, which earned a breakthrough prize in life sciences, showed that mTOR inhibition in multiple animal models reliably extended healthy lifespan. Rapamycin, the drug that directly inhibits mTOR, is the most reliably life-extending intervention ever tested in mammals. The Loma Linda vegetarians are not taking rapamycin. They have spent decades eating a diet that suppresses mTOR gently, continuously, through the amino acid profile of their food. This is the molecular mechanism that IGF-1 alone does not fully explain. IGF-1 drives cancer risk through growth signaling. mTOR suppression explains the broader mortality and aging data. Why the vegetarian Adventists are not just dying less from cancer, but dying less from everything, more slowly, at later ages. One important honesty note here. The mTOR research in humans is still developing. Most of the longevity data comes from animal models. What we have from the Adventist studies is the outcome, 9.5 extra years, and we have the mechanism candidates. The precise contribution of mTOR suppression relative to TMAO reduction and IGF-1 modulation is not yet quantified in a single human trial. What Fraser would say, and has said in interviews, is that you do not need to understand the exact mechanism waiting to act on the direction the data consistently points. Now let me show you exactly what the longest-lived Adventists eat and how to adapt it for your kitchen starting this week. Fraser's data identified the specific foods that appear most consistently among the Adventists with the best longevity outcomes, not theories, foods that appear in the dietary records of the people who lived longest in the largest vegetarian cohort study ever conducted. Walnuts. The 1992 Fraser study was the first to show that eating nuts 5 or more times per week reduced heart attack risk by 49%. A 2021 follow-up study found that 5 or more servings of walnuts per week, specifically, was associated with 14% lower all-cause mortality and 25% lower cardiovascular death risk with a gain of 1.3 extra years of life expectancy. 1 oz of walnuts, 28 g, a small handful, 5 days per week. That is the Tier 1 starting point. Not because it is easy, but because it is the most evidence-supported single dietary action in the entire Adventist data set. Steel-cut oatmeal at breakfast. The long-lived Adventists start the day with whole grains, not with eggs and bacon. Oats provide soluble fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, a different population from those that produce TMAO. They slow the glucose response, which regulates insulin, which affects the IGF-1 pathway. Steel-cut or rolled oats, not instant oats, because the fiber structure is more intact. With walnuts on top, with berries if you have them, beans and lentils daily at the midday meal, 1 cup per day, chickpeas, black beans, lentils, kidney beans. The specific type matters less than the habit. This was the single most consistent dietary pattern across all 5 blue zones, including Loma Linda. Legumes provide substantial plant protein without triggering the IGF-1 elevation that animal protein causes. Their amino acid profile is also the type that activates mTOR modestly rather than maximally, the difference between a gentle signal to maintain and an aggressive signal to grow. Soy milk as the dairy substitute. Adventist data showed soy milk provides bone health benefits comparable to dairy without the animal protein IGF-1 trigger. It is also the most common daily liquid for long-lived Adventists who do not consume dairy. Water, 5 or more glasses per day. Adventists in the original AHS-1 cohort who drank 5 or more glasses of water daily had significantly lower risk of fatal heart disease compared to those who drank 2 glasses or fewer. The mechanism is likely blood viscosity. More water, less thick blood, lower clotting risk. The lightest meal in the evening, eaten early. Many long-lived Adventists finish eating by 6 p.m. The evening meal is soup, fruit, or a light grain dish. The heaviest eating happens at midday. This timing pattern appears across multiple blue zones and is consistent with chronobiology research on insulin sensitivity. The body processes carbohydrates and proteins more efficiently earlier in the day. It also means mTOR, stimulated by the protein in the midday meal, has the full afternoon and evening to return to baseline before sleep, allowing the overnight repair window to run without interruption. Here is the Tier 1 protocol. 3 swaps. Keep everything else in your diet exactly the same. Swap red meat for beans or lentils 3 days per week. On Sunday, cook a pot of lentil soup or black bean chili. Use it for lunches on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. This reduces L-carnitine intake on those 3 days, which reduces TMAO production, which reduces the inflammatory and cardiovascular damage pathway. The swap must be to plant protein, not to chicken. Chicken contains similar levels of L-carnitine and choline, which also produces TMAO. The mechanism requires plant protein, not just less red meat. Eat 28 grams of walnuts, a small handful, 5 days per week. Put the bag on the counter so you see it. Eat them with breakfast, in the afternoon before dinner. The timing is less important than the frequency. 5 days a week. Replace 1 glass of dairy milk per day with unsweetened soy milk, any brand, any time of day. This one swap, repeated daily, begins shifting the protein source ratio in your diet from animal to plant, which is what the IGF-1 and mTOR data are both measuring. That is Tier 1. 3 changes. Start this week. The mistake that cancels all of Tier 1, replacing red meat with plant-based processed foods. Fake burgers, vegan sausages, processed meat substitutes. These products often contain high sodium levels, refined seed oils, and additive combinations that produce the same inflammatory environment the original meat was creating. The Adventists in Fraser's study did not eat plant-based processed food. They did not have it. They ate beans, whole grains, vegetables, and nuts. The processing level is the variable, not simply the animal content. Now let me tell you who Gary Fraser is as a person, not as a researcher, as a man who has lived inside the question he studies for 4 decades. Fraser grew up in Christchurch, New Zealand. He completed his medical degree at Otago University in 1969 and his PhD in epidemiology from the University of Auckland in 1978. He has been at Loma Linda University since before the Adventist Health Study began. He directs it still. He is 78 years old as of this writing. He lives in Loma Linda. He walks. He eats the foods his data identifies as protective. He is not performing the lifestyle for research credibility. He grew up in it before he had any data to support it. His church taught him to eat this way. His science then spent 4 decades confirming why it works. When journalists ask him what he would change about the modern American diet if he could change one thing, Fraser does not reach for a nuanced academic answer. He says, reduce the meat, start there. Everything else is refinement. There is a scene I find myself thinking about from the Loma Linda research literature. During the early years of AHS2 data collection, Fraser's team was processing dietary recall forms from tens of thousands of participants. The forms captured what people ate across multiple days at each meal. The pattern that kept appearing in the longest-lived participants was not dramatic. It was repetitive. The same foods at the same times, day after day. Oatmeal and walnuts in the morning, beans and vegetables at midday, something light and early in the evening, water throughout the day, no cigarettes, no alcohol. Not because of willpower, because that was just what lunch looked like in their homes, what dinner looked like, what their mothers had cooked, what their community ate. Fraser noted in multiple interviews that the Adventist diet is not difficult to follow once it becomes habitual. The difficulty is the transition period, the weeks when you are deciding what to eat instead of simply eating what the habit dictates. Once the habit forms, the cognitive load drops to nearly zero. That transition period is what most diet interventions fail to support. They provide the destination, but not the architecture for getting there. The Adventist community provides that architecture through shared meals, church dinners, family cooking, and a cultural framework where eating beans and walnuts is the normal thing, not the unusual thing. You do not have that community unless you are in Loma Linda, but you can build the habit architecture piece by piece, starting with the 3 swaps in Tier 1. Which of the foods I just described do you already have in your kitchen right now? Walnuts, oatmeal, beans, soy milk, water? Leave it in the comments. I am genuinely curious what the starting point looks like for people watching this. Here is Tier 2. After 4 to 6 weeks of Tier 1, when the 3 swaps feel ordinary, add these. Eliminate all red and processed meat. Keep fish 1 or 2 times per week if you want it. Pesco vegetarians in AHS2 showed the strongest all-cause mortality reduction of any diet group, 19% lower than non-vegetarians. The fish-inclusive option is not a compromise. It is the data-best dietary pattern in the entire study. If fish is not something you eat, that is also fine. The vegan group showed the strongest cardiovascular outcomes specifically. Add legumes at every lunch. 1 cup per day, minimum. This is when the TMAO reduction accelerates, not because the microbiome shifts instantly, but because you are consistently removing the L-carnitine substrate that feeds the TMAO-producing bacteria. Fewer days with red meat input means those bacterial populations receive fewer resources. The shift is slow. It is also directional and cumulative. Increase whole grains across the day. Brown rice instead of white. Whole wheat bread instead of white. Quinoa, barley, farro. The Adventist data linked whole grain consumption with reduced colorectal cancer risk alongside cooked green vegetables and beans. The combination, not the individual foods in isolation, drives the association. Restructure meal timing. Make lunch the largest meal of the day. Make dinner the smallest. Finish eating by 7 p.m. if possible. This single timing adjustment changes insulin sensitivity, which affects IGF-1 signaling over time, which affects the cancer pathway the Longo study identified. It also gives mTOR the full overnight window to return to baseline. Now Tier 3, this is the full Adventist vegetarian protocol. What the longest-lived participants in Fraser's study actually ate at the frequency they actually ate it. Fully plant-based. No meat, no dairy, no eggs. This is where the 42% lower cardiovascular mortality in vegan men appears, and the 34% lower female-specific cancer risk. This is also where the protein adequacy issue becomes critical for anyone over 65. The daily template. Steel-cut oatmeal with walnuts and fruit in the morning. Unsweetened soy milk. At midday, the largest meal, beans or lentils with whole grains and a large mixed vegetable plate. In the evening, the lightest meal, vegetable soup or fruit or a small grain bowl. Done before 7. Water throughout the day, 5 glasses minimum. The specific foods the longest-lived Adventists eat 5 or more times per week. Walnuts, oatmeal, whole wheat bread, soy milk, beans, tomatoes, and an abundance of other fruits and vegetables. This is not a theoretical template. It is what the dietary records of the people in Fraser's study who lived longest actually show. For anyone over 65 following Tier 3, ensure you are eating at least 0.8 g of plant protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Beans, lentils, tofu, tempeh, and nuts are your primary sources. Without adequate protein, the biological risk of muscle loss and frailty outweighs the cancer risk reduction. Fraser's data and Longo's nuance both point the same direction. Plants, sufficient quantity, adequate protein. The mistake that cancels Tier 3 entirely, undereating. When people eliminate animal products without planning, they often reduce their total calorie intake significantly because plant foods are less calorie dense. The result is muscle loss, fatigue, and often an early abandonment of the protocol. The Adventists do not eat small portions. They eat full, satisfying meals, large bowls of beans and grains at lunch, substantial breakfasts, real food in real quantities. The dietary shift is about what, not how much. Let me tell you what to expect from this protocol and when. Within 72 hours of eliminating red meat, your gut bacteria begin losing the L-carnitine substrate they convert into TMAO. The bacterial populations that specialized in producing TMA do not die immediately. They decline over weeks without the input they require. You will not feel this. It is happening without announcement. After your second grocery run of beans instead of meat, roughly 3 weeks in, the three swaps stop feeling like substitutes and start feeling like what you eat. That cognitive shift is the most important milestone, and it happens earlier than most people expect. After 90 days of consistent Tier 2 eating, the TMAO-producing bacteria have been receiving lower L-carnitine input for 3 months. The mTOR activation pattern has shifted from animal amino acid spikes to plant amino acid modulation. Neither change announces itself. Both are measurable in blood work if you run the panels. IGF-1 levels in men who have eliminated red meat and dairy for 90 days typically drop measurably in that time. The Longo team documented this in controlled interventions. The morning you make oatmeal and walnuts for breakfast without thinking about whether you are supposed to, that morning is more important than any specific measurable metric. The centenarians in Loma Linda do not track their IGF-1 levels. They make oatmeal. They eat walnuts. They cook beans. The invisibility of the practice is the practice. One action for this week, only one. Buy a bag of walnuts and a can of black beans or lentils. Put the walnuts on the kitchen counter where you will see them tomorrow morning. Eat a handful with breakfast. On Sunday, make a pot of lentil soup large enough for 3 or 4 lunches. That is it. That is the beginning of the 9.5-year gap. Gary Fraser is still at Loma Linda University, still directing the study, still eating walnuts every day. He began this research when most of his current study participants were in their 30s. He watched them age. He watched who died and from what and at what age. And he has been building the picture for 4 decades. The picture is clear enough now to act on. Had you ever heard of TMAO before today? I ask because it is one of the most consequential findings in cardiovascular medicine in the last 20 years. And almost no one outside of research has heard of it. The 9.5 years are already there, waiting. If this deep dive into the biological secrets of longevity has changed the way you look at your daily meals, please subscribe and like this channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the history and science that has been hidden from the mainstream. Let's cultivate a healthier future together. The next treasure of human health will be revealed soon.